It's time to think again about death and life, humility and honor, leadership and service, worship and calling. It's time to think again about the role of spiritual friendships, letting go of anxiety and celebrating missions. It is time to think again.
So it's good to be with you tonight. We're back into our Philippians study and we're talking about this idea of think again. And I want to start by telling you a story. I still remember 40 years ago when I got my first school backpack. It was bright blue and it had the bright yellow word Castle Primary on it, which was the name of my elementary school. And I was so proud of that backpack. I got it just before we went on a Mediterranean vacation. I remember taking that backpack with me, and there was nothing in it. I mean, I took it everywhere we went on that trip, but literally that backpack was empty. But I was so proud of my backpack. And then as time went on, of course, my backpacks changed. They got bigger, they got sturdier for all I had to carry around. And that was what I did. I had my backpacks. But obviously, backpacks weren't only the only way I moved things around. I also had a suitcase. And I have this one vivid, horrid memory of at the end of my first semester as a first year in college, I was going home and it was a long journey home and I packed the one suitcase that I had and the journey was walk to the bus, get the bus to the train, get off the train, walk 2 miles to the next train station, get the next train, and then walk home. Now, I had no money. I couldn't afford cabs. So I had to walk this suitcase everywhere. And we're talking 30 years ago. It was a really big suitcase with a great big handle. And it was so heavy because I had a semester's worth of laundry. I'm not going to lie that I was taking home with me. And this was me taking my suitcase home. And I still have painful memories, vivid memories of trying to take that suitcase, just carrying it around the city. And it was so heavy. Now, today, fast forward 30 years, and I still have backpacks, I still have suitcases. Thankfully, now my suitcases have wheels and a really sturdy handle, and they're much easier to move. And my backpacks have got comfort fit and nice straps, and they're a lot easier for me to wear. And I think when I tell that story, there's probably part of that you can relate to too. How your backpacks have probably changed through time and also maybe how your suitcases have changed through time. But if we're honest, there's actually another bag that we carry all the time with us. It's not one that we can see though. It's actually one that's unseen, but it's a bag that's with us all the time. So let me describe that bag to you. It can be a bag or a case, but let me describe it. It's like one of those really old suitcases that you maybe saw from decades ago. And on that suitcase is a little tag that has your name and address, just in case it gets lost. And it's on the top of your case. And then on the sides of the case, I don't know if you remember, people used to put labels and stickers of all the places the case had gone. But at the same time, this case is bulging. It is full of stuff. It is just bursting out with the things on the inside. Well, what is that case? Well, as I said, it's unseen, but let's reflect on it. That little tag is your family of origin. And I think for some of you coming into Yale, your family have put great expectations on you about how well you should do here at Yale. So that little tag represents the expectations of family. But it also can represent just your family and whether you have pride in your family and the heritage you have, or maybe it represents very much the opposite, that for some reason you have guilt and shame about your family. And then with all those labels, as I said, those labels on that case, what do those represent? Well, those are your achievements and accolades. And again, coming to Yale, oh my goodness, there are lots of those. But some of us may feel that maybe we don't have enough of those on our case, that they're actually a little bit embarrassed by the lack of what they think should be all those labels and stickers on their case. But then finally, as I said, there's the inside of that case, the stuff that no one sees, that's all pressed in there. And what's that? Well, that represents maybe some hurt or pain or wounds and woundedness from our past. But you see, as I said, this case, this bag, we're carrying it around with us all the time, but no one can see it. So have you ever wondered, do I ever get rid of this bag? Is this case with me forever? And if it is, do I just buy a bigger case every time because I put more and more things in it? Or do I just try and make it more comfortable? Is that what it's going to be for me? Is this the way that we're meant to live? Well, imagine with me for a moment that you were never meant to live that way. Imagine with me for a moment that you were never meant to walk around with this case, that you could actually live very differently, that you don't need to have this case, this backpack, this bag with you at all. Tonight, we're going to look at Paul's words in Philippians 3, where he asks us to think again about what we understand about this baggage we're carrying with us. We're asked to think again about what we understand by the gospel. And we're going to see tonight that what Paul teaches us in this passage is really simply this: you don't have to carry that bag around with you. That case can go, because you can actually find your value, your worth, and your identity fully in Jesus. And you don't need to carry that around with you in any way, shape, or form. So let's read Philippians 3, verses 2 through 11. Philippians 3, verses 2 through 11. It says the following: watch out for those dogs, those people who do evil, those mutilators who say you must be circumcised to be saved. For we who worship by the Spirit of God are the ones who are truly circumcised. We rely on what Christ has done for us. We put no confidence in human effort, though I could have confidence in my own effort if anyone could. Indeed, if others have reasons for confidence in their own efforts, I have even more. I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I'm a pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a real Hebrew if ever there was one. I was a member of the Pharisees, who demand the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church, and so for righteousness I obeyed the law without fault. I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. For his sake, I have discarded everything else, counting it all but as garbage, so that I could gain Christ and become one with him. I no longer count on my own righteousness through obeying the law. Rather, I become righteous through faith in Christ. For God's way of making us right with himself depends on faith. I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. I want to suffer with him, sharing in his death, so that one way or another I will experience the resurrection from the dead. Okay, what do we see in this story tonight? Well, let's go back to verses 4 through 6. Paul does a weird thing. He boasts about himself. It's like, dude, what are you doing? He says, I have confidence in my own effort. I have more confidence, in fact, than any of you. And he lists all these things about himself or the achievements of his life. Okay, so the question comes to us then. So why does Paul do that? Why does Paul boast about himself? Well, we actually have to go back to verses 2 and 3. And it becomes clear Paul boasts because people were coming in and saying something that he did not agree with. Who were those people? Well, there were people who proposed themselves to be Christians. And they were coming into the church that Paul had planted and said, hey, you guys, you're great. That's right. It's faith in Jesus. Then they said, yeah, but it's really faith plus. They're saying, it's not just enough to believe in Jesus, to have faith in Jesus, but you really need to be circumcised. You really need to do these things. You see, these were the traditions that they had grown up with, and they hadn't understood that it was just faith in Jesus. And to them, to be right with God, to have God's approval, to make sure that he loved you, you had to do these things. You had to make sure you were doing it. It was faith plus. So they came in and said, this is what you have to do. Well, this got Paul mad. And why did it get Paul mad? Because he had left this life. This was the life Paul had grown up with. And when he had the revelation of who Jesus was, he realized, this is redundant. I don't need to carry the case anymore. And so for Paul, he realized it was just faith in Jesus. It was knowing Jesus was all he needed. Yet this idea was alluring for the Philippians, because what they were realizing was, oh yeah, it's faith in Jesus, but when I do these things, God will approve of me. Then I know God has to approve of me because I've done them. He was saying, they were saying like, it's okay. This is, if I work at these things, then God has to love me because I'm being good. I'm doing the right works. So Paul knew this was beginning to tempt him away. So what does Paul say? He lists these boasts. He says things like, first of all, hey, I was circumcised on the 8th day. In other words, all these people in this church who were Gentiles, who are now being told they needed to do this, he's like, I've already had it done. I had it on the 8th day, which is the right day to do it. He says, I was of the tribe of Israel. And again, for these Gentiles in Philippi, they would try and buy the right to be a Jew, but they couldn't do that. They had to work their way in. Paul's like, hey, I was a Jew. I'm of the tribe of Israel. And then he goes on to say, hey, and not only that, I was the tribe of Benjamin. Well, what does that mean? That's like he was an insider of the insiders. He's like, I was right inside. And then finally he says, and I was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. What does that mean? Well, if you're a Harry Potter fan, it means no mudblood here. He was pure. He was pure. So Paul starts by saying, I was the purest of the pure. So how can we imagine that? Well, I don't know about you. When I was in school, we would have these moments where the teacher would say, okay, everyone line up from shortest to tallest. Now, first of all, I didn't like that lineup because I was so average. I was always right in the middle, right in the middle. But, everyone would always try and kind of move themselves further up. No one wanted to be at the back, but everyone would try and move themselves up to get closest to the front of the line. Well, here's what Paul's saying. It was like that when it comes to heritage. And for some of us at Yale, we look at the tag on our bag, don't we? And maybe for some of us, the expectations of our parents just seems too much. We want to honor them, but it seems really hard to meet their expectations. Or we maybe look at that tag and we think, you know what? My heritage doesn't seem really good compared to everyone else around me. And you see, what we begin to do is we begin to compare that tag in our bag. We rank ourselves against everyone else. We try and work out, where do we fit in the line? Because everyone wants to be at the front. Everyone wants to say, I have the best heritage. I have the most right to be here at Yale. And what Paul's saying is, you might think you're at the front. I am in a different line. I am so much better than you ever were. I'm in a whole different line. So the first thing Paul is saying to the people at Philippi is, listen, when it comes to heritage, no one can beat me. I'm at the front of the line. You guys aren't even in the same line as me. But he goes on. He says this, he says, okay, not only was my heritage the best, he says, but I was a Pharisee and I was a zealot. Well, what does that mean? Well, actually what Paul's saying is, there was not a mark in my ledger against the Torah. In other words, he says, I was faultless. I was sinless in the law. Now that takes so much effort. It takes so much work. It means he worked harder, longer, and faster than anyone else. So what does that say to us? Well, we're back in the line. Teacher's saying shortest to tallest. But this time it's not about your pedigree, your heritage. It's about how hard you're working. And again, we're trying to rank ourselves. We're trying to compare ourselves. And so we're not looking at the tag on the bag now, but we're looking at all the labels on our bag. And we're comparing against everyone else. And we're looking at the accolades and the achievements that our peers and our sweet mates and our friends at Yale have. Oh, how many accolades and achievements do they have? How many do I have? Okay, I need to be behind them. They need to be ahead of me. But we even do that with our spirituality. We're like, oh, how many spiritual disciplines do I have? How hard do I work in my faith? How hard do you work in your faith? How often do you pray? How often do I pray? And you see, we're trying to put ourselves in the line. But what's Paul saying again? Paul's saying, hey, I'm in a totally different line. I'm not even at the front of your line. I am so far ahead of you. So why is Paul saying all this? Well, he's going to drive to a point, because here's when we come to the inside of the case. That stuff that's all stuffed in there. You see, when we work so hard to get all those labels on the case, all those accolades and achievements, when we work really hard, okay, what's happening is so often in the inside that no one can really see at all, it's causing us anxiety. We're anxious because we have to try and outperform. We're stressed because someone else is doing better than us. We feel like we're failing because we're not living to the up to the expectations of the pedigree of the family we came from. We're ashamed that we don't seem to be as good enough as those Yaleys around us and their pedigree and their heritage. You see, in all these ways, whether it's the tag on the bag or the labels on the bag, we're trying to get ourselves to the front of the line. We're trying to get ourselves to the front of the pack. But not only that, but we're doing it with our spirituality. If I work harder at this, if I do that, then God will approve me. God will love me. I'll be right with God. You see that third line though, the one with the stuff that's in the bag? No one wants to be in that line. We want to be at the front of the line for our heritage, we want to be at the front of the line for our accolades and achievements. But the one that's our brokenness, the one that no one can really see at all, the hidden one inside the bag, no one wants to be in that line at all. So what's Paul trying to say in all this? Paul's trying to tell you this. I was at the front of those first two lines. My heritage, my pedigree, and my achievements and accolades, I was better than everyone else. But what Paul realized was he still had the bag. He was still walking around with the bag every day. In fact, he was showing the bag off. Look at my accolades, look at my pedigree, look at my heritage, look at my achievements. But he was still carrying the bag with him all the time. He was still trying to please and be pleased and trying to get approved by God, by others, by even himself. And he realized this is not the way to live. So then we come to the crux of what Paul says, and that's in verses 7 through 9. He pivots from boasting and he just hits them right between the eyes. He says, here's the bottom line. All of that means nothing compared to knowing Jesus. This is the crux of the scripture. He says, I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. Now, what's Paul saying here? Well, let me start with what he's not saying. He's not saying you shouldn't care about your education. You shouldn't care about your job. You shouldn't. That's not what Paul's saying at all. But here's what he's saying. The problem is when the good thing becomes the ultimate thing. Well, what does that mean? It's when I'm going to work so hard in this class that I will disregard my faith. I will disregard my friendships. I will push aside my real community. I'll push aside my real responsibility. I'll push aside my real devotion. You see, the good thing has now become the ultimate thing. And Paul's saying that's the problem. Not the good thing, work hard. But when these things are pushed aside, that good thing has now become the ultimate thing. You see, Paul had this spiritual revelation. He'd realized that the ultimate thing was to know Jesus, was to know God. Everything else, the point of this case, what was the end point of carrying all these things around? To carry them all my days? To have this baggage all my life? It's just going to get bigger and heavier as I try to stuff more and more things in and make the outside look even more impressive. But he realized the most important thing was to have an intimate relationship with Jesus. He realized that above all else was to know and be known by Jesus, because he realized as he did that, he got to the heart and the beauty of the gospel, which says this: to be front of the line in heritage and be front of the line when it comes to your achievements and accolades means nothing. To be in the third line, the line with all the brokenness on the inside, actually that's the beautiful line, because that's when we come to Jesus and say, we have nothing to bring. God, I'm broken. I've got a great big bag with me, and I'm trying really hard to make it look impressive. But on the inside, I'm dealing with anxiety and stress and depression and a whole bunch of other stuff. I can't keep on walking around with these bags. Because the beauty of the gospel is this: when you come to Jesus that way, you realize that he accepts you for who you are. He loves you for who you are. And he begins on the inside to change you. And he begins to, to build up your worth because of him. And you find that you have worth and value and identity because of who Jesus is and what he's done for you. And you don't have to strive for it. You don't have to fight for it. It's yours because of him. It's yours because of him. So let's bring this to a close. We often work so hard on this bag that no one sees. Sometimes we love the heritage we have, and sometimes we feel guilty or ashamed because of our family. And we work hard at putting all these labels on it, but it never stops, it never ends. We keep on having to put more and more labels on the outside of our bag. And we're always comparing it to everyone else around us here at Yale. How does mine look compared to yours? And we rank and compare. But in the inside, we're stuffing a whole bunch of anxiety and pain and wounds and shame, and we're carrying it all the time. But what's Paul reminding us in this story? That he had the best bag of all of us. And he looked at it and he realized it means nothing. This is not getting me right with God. This is not going to take me where I think I should go. And so he gave the bag to Jesus. And Jesus took the bag from him. And then he found that he had worth and value and identity because of who Jesus says he is. And he didn't have to strive for it, he didn't have to work for it. It was the gift of God for him and to him. So tonight, we need to think again about our understanding of this bag that we're carrying around with us. We need to think again about if we think we have to work hard to be approved by God. We have to think again about what we think is important that will take us on in life. Because what we see in this story is Paul, who was a way ahead of us, realized that the most important thing was to know Jesus and to be known by him. So what do you do with a message like this tonight? Well, for some of you, I think you need to come to Jesus about the tag on your bag. And you need to come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I'm actually embarrassed or I feel guilty because there's wounds and pain of my family that are expecting too much. Help me to honor them, but at the same time, to let things go that need to be let go. Some of you need to deal with the labels in your bag and say, Lord, have I made a good thing the ultimate thing? When I've cast aside real devotion, a real community, a real responsibility, just to get as many labels in this bag. And some of you need to come to God and say, God, I need you to come inside this bag. I need you to take the things on the inside, the woundedness, the shame of my past, the things I'm dealing with, and I need you to deal with them. Because this is what Paul realized, that Jesus wants to deal with all of that. And we don't have to carry those bags around with us, but we can genuinely have freedom and life and new creation in and through him.